The silence in the chamber weighed heavier than the cold of dawn, a stillness so dense it pressed against your skin before the first breath left your lips. Outside, the pale blue of winter's early light seeped through paper screens, casting ghostly shadows that danced slowly across the polished wooden floor. Your footfalls were swallowed by the thick tatami mats, each step a whisper against the quiet village sleeping beneath a creeping shroud of mist. The air inside tasted faintly of aged incense, its smoke curling in fragile spirals that dissolved softly into the stale atmosphere. Your fingers trembled slightly, brushing against the rough texture of the weathered paper stacked before you, a fragile canvas for the poet's delicate brushstrokes. You felt the subtle chill of the room settle into the worn fabric of your solitary kimono, the threads coarse and unyielding as they constricted your movements with understated oppression. Each breath you took seemed amplified, the sound unnervingly sharp in the heavy silence that draped over the imperial court's chamber like a slow, suffocating fog. You recalled how, today, as always, your task would be to trace every syllable of the court poet's verses, words that fluttered softly like the wings of a moth, while restraining the restless urge to interrupt the fragile equilibrium. The shuffling of silk robes and the faint dragging of feet over the tatami were the only sounds that dared breach the oppressive calm, threading a fragile tension through your resulting stillness. Outside, the wind whispered through a half-opened window, stirring the edges of paper screens with a fragile, rhythmic sigh. The sudden, distant clink of a teacup being set reverently into its saucer punctuated the moment, a delicate, measured note among the quiet reverence. You pressed your palm to the floor, feeling the cool grain beneath your skin, grounding yourself in the endless repetition of the ritual. This slow dance of watchful observation stretched time into a liquid monotony, where focus blurred between the creeping dread of a misstep and the sterile hope for endurance. The weight of unseen eyes felt omnipresent, even as the faces themselves melted into the shadows cast by flickering candles. You thought, if the inconveniences of modern life were a storm, then today's silence was a glacier, inching steadily forward and threatening to swallow any flicker of distraction. If losing a phone's battery today might stir panic, what despair would have risen at the thought of your last shard of warmth in a fire fading to ash, leaving only the bitter cold. Here, the small comforts were few, a shared breath, the faint pulse of a heartbeat in sync with your own, the brief warmth exchanged across the circle of the waiting. It was in these hushed moments, circling an unseen flame, where a flicker of fragile hope tried to push through the veil of monotony. But then, abruptly, the usual muted murmurs ceased. A hush fell, denser than before, as if the very breath of the room had been caught in a silent trap. You caught a stolen glance, exchanged between two courtiers. So fleeting it might have been a trick of the light, but the subtle shift sent a ripple threading through your tension. A stillness so profound it swallowed even the wind's soft secrets. Something unseen shifted the rigid order, an invisible weight settling over the proceedings, cold and deliberate. Hey, before Morpheus catches you completely, just make sure you're still subscribed. Sometimes the button disappears, and I don't want you to miss the next sleepy tales. While you're here, leave a like, soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this quiet corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The room remained drenched in hollow silence, the kind that seemed to thicken with each long breath you exhaled, slow and steady, feeling the weight of endless patience weaving into your bones. Your eyes traced the delicate brushstrokes still drying on the paper before you. The poet's words dancing faintly in your mind, like moths suspended under a pale light. Outside, the breath of winter had deepened. The mist crept lower now, swathing the village in layers of damp and shadow that curled into every crevice. Your kimono clung with cold insistence, the rough weave a subtle reminder of the hardships woven into your days. Each movement was measured. The fabric protested softly as your fingers slid over the wooden frame of the low table, seeking balance between reverence and resolve. Time felt diluted, stretching so thin it vanished and reappeared between the moments. The rustle of silk, the almost imperceptible creak of floorboards settling, the faint sigh of wind threading through the half-open window. You felt anchored, yet adrift, tangled between the ache of waiting and the necessity of silence. You glanced again at the paper screens, shadows pirouetting slowly in the weak light, as if reluctant to disturb the solemnity of the chamber. The scent of incense lingered still, a faint, smoky sweetness threading through the stale air, curling around your senses like a half-remembered dream. Your hand hovered for an instant over the quiet pool of ink, waiting patiently, as if sensing the tension filleting the edges of your restrained breath. Outside, a few sparse chirps of unseen birds punctuated the stillness, fragile notes cracking a brittle shell of quiet. A slow tightening unfurled deep in your chest, a delicate coil of apprehension sharpened by the frozen calm. The stolen glance between courtiers remained vivid in your mind, their eyes glinting briefly like sharp stones in the gloom before disappearing behind the folding doors. You could almost taste the cold ledger of invisible scrutiny standing just beyond the flickering candlelight, stretching long fingers that brushed your skin with icy hesitation. Your pulse synchronized with the distant, rhythmic clink of porcelain, a muted reminder of precise rituals and unspoken expectations. Your bare feet pressed gently into the grain of the tatami mats, the soft fibers offering a muted texture beneath your weight. You moved slowly to the sliding door, the wooden frame a cool, resistant wall against the flush of your palm. The familiar creak of the threshold was swallowed immediately by your careful stillness. You hesitated, eyelashes drooping as your attention traced the half-dark passage beyond, lit only by the faint glow of a solitary lantern. The air here was heavier, tinged with the discreet musk of aged paper and the faint tang of pine smoke curling from distant hearths. Every footfall you made was a muffled echo in the vast emptiness, sewn into a seamless rhythm of cautious progress. The village, suspended beneath its misty shawl, seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting alongside you. Your senses sharpened, every detail, a whisper pressed against your nerves. The slight unevenness of a floorboard, the subtle shift of shadows flickering against the paper walls, the hint of a cool draft weaving through the gaps in the sliding doorframe. You advanced slowly, the ritual of careful movement, softening the sharp edges of your tension. Passing beneath the low eaves, the texture of worn wood felt rougher beneath your fingertips than before, your skin noting the minute splinters like gentle reminders of time's passage. You paused beneath a flickering lantern, its light wavering uncertainly against the creeping touch of fog seeping inside. For a moment, you caught the scent of wet earth, mingled with faint traces of burning cedar nearby, a quiet warmth amid the cold embrace. Your shoulders relaxed slightly, the tiniest pulse of fragile comfort threading through the stillness, like the brief caress of a sunbeam through a lattice window. Further on, the corridor seemed interminable, each step a slow unfolding of quiet ritual. The soft scrape of your kimono against the floor echoed faintly in the hollow space, a steady counterpoint to the muted tapping of your breathing. You reached a narrow alcove where a thin blade of moonlight spilled generously upon the floor, the silver edge grazing the tatami's worn texture. You lowered yourself carefully onto the threshold, the cool bamboo beneath your legs a steadying presence, the one constant in a world that seemed suspended between breath and shadow. Your eyes adjusted to the dim light as you tuned into the symphony of small noises, the distant drip of melting frost from eaves, the quiet rustle of a drawn curtain, the faint shiver of a loose paper screen flapping in the wind. Somewhere, beyond the fog, a bell tolled softly, its peal long and sorrowful, echoing faintly like a memory you couldn't quite grasp. You listened as the sound dissipated into a fragile silence, the odd comfort of its presence settling alongside your own slow heartbeat. A chill traced a path down your spine, subtle yet unmistakable. The stillness had thickened again, folding around you tighter than before, as if the very shadows had learned to whisper secrets in tongues only half heard. Your breath came slower now, deeper, as you pressed the back of your hand gently against the cool wall, feeling the uneven grain beneath your flesh. You wondered briefly if your next move would bring relief or deepen the strain that coiled quietly in your chest. Then the muffled thud, soft but deliberate, echoed faintly from beyond the corridor's bending curve. It was not the sound of the wind, nor the settling houses. The air shifted subtly, tension blooming again, a slow tightness, like the first crack in frost-thick ground. You drew inward, your body leaning softly into the shadows as you strained to listen. Whatever it was, it did not belong to this steady rhythm of silence and waiting. You slipped forward, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. The distant shape of the chamber awaited, cloaked in half-darkness that seemed to pulse with quiet menace. The moment stretched, slow, thick, infinite, before the faintest glimmer of movement caught your eye. Just beyond the folding screens, a shadow flickered, delicate and deliberate, like a breath held too long. And there, beyond the fleeting silhouette, unmistakable weight of eyes locked onto you through the veiled stillness, waiting for the next step in this silent, unspoken dance. The shadow flickered once more, beyond the folding screens, a feather-light disturbance in the heavy stillness that wrapped around you like a shroud. You felt the faintest prickle at the nape of your neck, as if the very air had tightened its grip, sealing you in an invisible cage woven from whispered secrets and held breaths. The lantern's glow beside you wavered, casting tremulous light and deepening the shadows that pooled in the corners of the narrow corridor. Your breath slowed, sliding between your lips like a fragile thread of smoke, almost lost in the dense silence, hovering thick and suffocating. You pressed your palm more firmly against the bamboo floor, feeling the coolness seep through your skin, a grounding certainty beneath. The uncertainty curling around your nerves. The soft scrape of your kimono against the tatami was a muted echo in the hollow chamber, a reminder of your presence in this suspended time. Every movement was a careful negotiation with the silence, measured and delicate, like tracing the thin edge of a razor without disturbance. The shadows swayed gently as the lantern flickered again, shadows that seemed to breathe and pulse with a restrained life of their own. The faint scent of cedar smoke drifted further in from outside, mingling with lingering incense as an invisible thread that wove past your senses, inviting a quiet calm even as the air around you held its breath. You shifted your weight lightly, the subtle resistance of the coarse fabric pressing against your skin, a reminder of your solitary place here. The corridor stretched onward, a slender vein of dim light and muted sound that seemed to pulse softly in time with your heartbeat. Your eyes traced the paper walls, their faint creases catching fragile patterns of light and shadow, as if the surfaces themselves whispered old stories long lost to time. You allowed your gaze to drift upward, catching the low curve of the ceiling, where wooden beams, worn smooth by countless years, gathered like silent sentinels watching over the quiet. The chill of the room seeped deeper now, threading into the fibers of your kimono, wrapping slowly around your limbs like slow-flowing water. Your fingers sought the familiar grain of the nearest wall, rough yet steady, the slight unevenness beneath your touch, a tactile anchor in the Wade silence. A distant bell tolled again, its sonorous peal stretching through the misted village and curling into your ears like a voice caught between sorrow and hope. The sound faded slowly, carried by the shifting fog that pressed at the windows and softened the hard edges of the world beyond. Your pulse slowed beneath the tolling, sinking further into the rhythm woven by breath and shadow. For a moment, the weight of waiting lifted as the resonance echoed through the spaces between moments. But then the stillness tightened again, settling like frost on frozen earth. Your body tensed imperceptibly, the smallest tightening around your ribs, as unseen eyes seemed to probe deeper into your thoughts. The soft thud had come again, muffled but deliberate, reverberating along the corridor's length, a muted heartbeat of unease beneath the cold calm. You slid a single step forward, the soles of your feet gliding silently over the tatami, each one a hushed brush against silence. The shadows bent and breathed with your slow progress, reluctant accomplices to this careful advance. You paused beneath another flickering lantern, its amber light caught by the delicate curling edges of a nearby paper screen. The scent of wet earth crept in faintly, carried by the cool draft slipping beneath the sliding doors. The air was dense and heavy, threaded with whispers of distant forests and the slow decay of autumn leaves. Your eyes settled on the muted dance of dust motes floating in the lantern's glow. Tiny worlds, drifting weightless, caught in a beam of fragile warmth that refused to be extinguished. The thin crescent of moon hung low outside, visible through the narrow gaps in the paper screens, pale and distant, like a watchful guardian in the night. Its silver light filtered through the mist, laying ghostly patterns upon the tatami, where the rough weave beneath your fingertips told of time's enduring passage. You lowered yourself silently to the floor, the cool bamboo pressing a gentle chill through your robe, steadying the tremor that danced along your spine. Your ears tuned to the softened rhythm of the house, the faint drip of melting frost from the eaves outside, the whisper of drawn curtains stirred by the restless wind, the subtle creak of ancient wood settling into the cold night. Each sound was a thread woven into the fabric of the quiet, binding moments together in a fragile tapestry of vigilant stillness. Your breath deepened, slow and unhurried, a rhythmic anchor to counterbalance the growing weight that pressed softly at the edges of your awareness. You rubbed your fingertips along the edge of the low table beside you, the lacquered surface cool and smooth against the coarse fabric of your kimono. The paper before you lay pristine, waiting with a patient stillness, the untouched ink a silent promise of words yet to come. You trace the outline of a single character in your mind's eye, the delicate strokes folding into intricate shapes, fragile wings that fluttered faintly in the dim light. The memory stirred a brief flicker of warmth, a soft spark against the creeping chill. From the depths of the corridor came a subtle shift, a breath caught in the throat of the house, a gentle, almost imperceptible rustle that unsettled the fabric of quiet. You rose slowly, the fabric whispering softly over to Tommy as you followed the sound with measured steps. Your gaze sharpened, catching a movement, barely a flicker, at the far edge of the chamber's shadow. The lantern's flame trembled, casting long tendrils of darkness that curled like slow fingers along the floorboards. Your heart fluttered, the first true disturbance in the enveloping stillness. Yet you remained silent, steady, the tension coiling slowly through your ribs like a sleeping serpent, waiting, watchful, and then, in the slightest shift of the air, the distinct sensation of a hidden presence becoming conscious of your own emerged. The weight of eyes, unseen yet keen, held you frozen, suspended in the narrow seam of shadow and light. A breath later, the faintest trace of movement, a shape slipping behind the screens, and the corridor once again fell into silence, thick and complete. Only now, the silence no longer felt empty. It was waiting, watching, and you knew, with a quiet certainty, that the dance was far from over. The weight of the silence pressed more insistently now, folding around you like the thick fabric of your kimono, cool but unyielding against your skin. The faint flicker of the lantern beside you wavered again, as if uncertain whether to hold its light steady or surrender to the creeping shadows pooling at the edges of the corridor. You breathed out slowly, the sound drawn long enough to thread itself into the stillness, a fragile anchor to tether you to the moment. Your fingers traced the rough grain of the bamboo floor, each subtle ridge grounding you deeper in this quiet, dense world. The air carried the faint musk of cedar smoke and damp earth, interlaced with the lingering, almost sweet trace of incense that had long since burned away. Outside, the mist thickened further, swallowing the village in a cold breath that pressed against the paper screens like a secret waiting to be revealed. You shifted your weight, the soft scrape of your kimono against the tatami, a gentle reminder of your solitude. Each step forward was a ceremony in itself, measured and deliberate, your footfall muffled in the thick weave of fibers beneath you. The corridor stretched ahead, a narrow vein of flickering light and shadow, its length an invitation to the slow unraveling of time. A distant bell tolled again, the sound rolling softly through the hushed village, the echo of an unseen presence releasing its breath into the gathering night. The note lingered, fading like a half-remembered melody, and you imagined it threading through the trees beyond the window, catching momentary light in the delicate frost clinging to bare branches. Your pulse settled into this rhythm, slow and steady, a quiet dance with the invisible currents that whispered through the house. Beyond the folding screens, the faintest movement brushed at the edges of your vision. A delicate shiver of shadow, a subtle shift that sent a ripple through the calm. You held your breath, the cool air settling heavily in your lungs as your gaze sharpened, catching the flicker of something unseen just beyond the veil of paper and wood. There was no sudden motion, no abrupt sound, only the weight of presence, quiet and deliberate, testing the limits of this fragile stillness. You took a slow, almost reverent step forward. The texture of the wooden frame under your palm was cool, the slight unevenness of its surface a grinding touch amid the taut anticipation. Your fingers pressed gently against the paper screen, its delicate fibers trembling beneath your touch, like the wings of a moth caught in a muted breeze. The scent of aging parchment mingled with the deeper notes of pine smoke curling through the hallway, a quiet symphony of sensory threads weaving together. The corridor seemed to stretch longer with every passing breath, the distance folding in and unfolding again like a slow, deliberate sigh. You felt the coarse weave of your kimono tighten softly around your shoulders, a silent reminder of the ritual's weight. Time itself seemed suspended in the half-light, each second a droplet hanging heavy in the still air. You settled at the threshold of the chamber beyond. The screens, the floor cool beneath your knees as you lowered yourself with painstaking care. The bamboo pressed gently through the layers of cloth, its steady chill a relief against the flush creeping across your skin. Your eyes adjusted to the gloom, tracing the muted silhouettes cast by the flickering lantern light. Shadows clung to corners and crevices, shifting ever so slowly, like the hushed breath of the house itself. Soft sounds filtered through the quiet, the rustle of paper, faint creaking of timber settling after years of watch. A distant drip punctuated the stillness, the melting frost tracing slow pathways down weathered eaves. Each sound wove into your awareness, a delicate counterpoint to the heavy silence that wrapped around you like a second skin. Your hand hovered over the low table beside you, fingertips brushing against the smooth sheet of untouched paper waited quietly, its pristine surface pregnant with the promise of delicate marks soon to be traced. Words that would flutter softly like the wings of moths in the dim light. The air thickened, the stillness tightening like breath caught behind a quiet gate. A subtle shiver ran along your spine, as if the shadows themselves whispered secrets, brushing your skin with unseen fingers. You felt the weight of countless unseen eyes, probing, waiting their silent examination. A heavy cloak draped over your shoulders. A faint thud echoed again, soft, deliberate, resonating through the corridor's length like the distant heartbeat of hidden wings. You remained motionless, the rough weave of your kimono grounding every tremor, every whispered tension. Slowly, a tentative step forward, folded into the rhythm of your breath, the careful glide of your feet against the tatami, a muted hymn of containment. Ahead, the lantern flickered more wildly, its amber flame casting restless shadows that seemed to pulse against the wavering paper walls. You noticed the faintest curl of smoke drifting upward from what you could not see, a wisp of contradiction, warm and alive amid the pervasive cold. Your gaze caught a fleeting glimpse beyond the screens. The shadow moved again, a slow arc of darkness, barely detached from the encompassing gloom. It was delicate, almost tentative, like a breath held a fraction too long before quiet release. The air between you quivered with unspoken tension, an invisible thread taut with the promise of revelation or retreat. You let your eyes rest there, heart steady but alert, tracing the soft edges of the moment as it stretched into fragile eternity. The cold wood beneath your hand grounded you. The brush of air teased your hair, and the faint warmth of the nearby lantern seeped slowly into your skin. And then, without warning, the shadow shifted once more, a sudden, slow unfolding into a shape unmistakably deliberate, deliberate as a whispered command. Your breath caught, held tight in your chest, as the unseen gaze, piercing through the half-light, locked onto you with a stillness that spoke of patience and silent challenge. The corridor held its breath with you. The lantern dimmed slightly, as if hesitant to witness what might come next. Darkness gathered more closely around the distant curve, poised delicately between the fold of light and shadow, waiting. The shadow shifted once more, beyond the folding screens, a soft ripple stirring the heavy silence, like a delicate breath held just beyond reach. You remained still, your body poised in the half-light, where lantern flame trembled uncertainly, casting long, wavering fingers of amber glow that barely reached the corners of the narrow corridor. The faintest drift of cedar smoke mingled with the lingering hint of incense, creating a scent both ancient and elusive, as if the very air carried stories folded into its weaving. You pressed your fingertips more firmly into the bamboo floor, the coolness pressing beneath your skin like a steady pulse against the fragile thread of restraint tightening inside you. The subtle scrape of your kimono against the tatami whispered softly, a muted echo weaving into the hushed fabric of the house. Each breath you drew seemed impossibly deliberate, a slow, measured dance between tension and fragile calm. The flickering lantern nearby cast a glow that danced hesitantly across the rough wooden beams overhead, their dark grain carrying the memory of countless silent nights. Slowly, you allowed your gaze to drift across the paper screens. Their delicate fibers, stretched thin with age, caught the thin crescent of moonlight outside, a pale, watchful eye that traced ghostly patterns on the floor beneath your knees. The cold bamboo pressed firm against your legs was a steady reminder of the moment's weight, anchoring you in place as the mist beyond curled in slow, creeping tendrils. Outside, the village lay swathed in layers of deepening shadow, the soft murmur of distant wind sighing through bare branches like forgotten lullabies. A distant bell tolled again, its mournful note lingering and weaving through the silence like a fragile thread of sound pulled taut. You felt it settle in your chest, a slow, steady echo beneath the quiet tension wrapping tight as frost across your ribs. The scent of wet earth snuck in through the half-open window, subtle but insistently there, mixing with the ancient musk of the wood floor, warmed faintly by years of quiet moments held in waiting. Your eyelids fluttered briefly, heavy with the slow weight of endurance. The rough fibers of your kimono brushed against your wrists. As your hands rested lightly on the low table beside you, tracing slow circles over the lacquered surface. The paper before you lay untouched, its pristine surface whispering a quiet resistance to disturbance, as if holding its breath alongside you. The inkwell, dark and calm, sat waiting like a pool of still waters, reflecting the fragile light. A faint sound caught your attention, a soft, deliberate movement somewhere beyond the corridor's bend. Not wind, not the settling of an old house, but something more precise, calculated. Your pulse tightened, slow and steady, as you shifted your weight almost imperceptibly, the bamboo cool beneath your fingertips, offering a subtle anchor. The lantern's flame flickered more vigorously for a brief moment, throwing shadows into restless motion and sharpening the edges of the silence like a held breath just before release. You slid forward, careful as the soft scratch of kimono against tatami stitched its rhythm into the gathering night. The corridor stretched before you, a slender vein threaded with dim light and deeper shadows pressing close. The scent of smoke thickened briefly, a faint warmth lingering as if from a hidden hearth, pulling at the edges of the cold stillness. The folding papers rustled faintly, a hesitant murmur in the quiet, fragile, half-heard secrets passing between moments. At the threshold of the chamber beyond, you lowered yourself, slowly, bamboo floor, cool and steady beneath your legs, as you settled into the familiar stillness. Your gaze adjusted to the low gloom, tracing the vague silhouette of objects softened by shadow. The curve of an ink brush resting quietly, the delicate balance of a small porcelain cup gleaming faintly in the flickering light. Dust motes floated like weightless spirits in the lantern's glow, their slow spiral an elegant waltz set to the rhythm of your deepened breathing. The faint trickle of melting frost continued in the distance, drips falling softly like whispered measures marking time's passage. Somewhere beyond the paper walls, the slight creak of timber echoed low. A subtle sigh rolled from the worn wooden frame as the house settled deeper into the night. The atmosphere seemed to pulse gently, a fragile balance of waiting and watching, as if the house itself held a secret pressed close beneath its breath. Your fingers brushed lightly over the edge of the low table, finding comfort in the smooth lacquer, a tactile island amid the cool shadows. The paper before you remained still. A silence grew thicker, wrapping like a slow, deliberate shroud. Then, from the depths just beyond the chamber's border, came the subtle movement again. A darker shape loosening from shadow, slow as ink spreading through water, deliberate yet tentative. The flame of the lantern flickered in tandem, casting long, stretched tendrils that seemed to reach out with quiet purpose. Your breath caught and stayed just behind your lips, taut as a thread pulled tight, echoing the stillness that had fallen like frozen silk over your skin. A chill settled deep in your bones, not cold but alive, an ancient breath stirring under the quiet, weaving anticipation into the quiet night. The figure moved once more, a whisper of motion dark and slow, like the beat of hidden wings in a velvet dusk. You felt the weight of those unseen eyes press closer, silent but piercing, threading across the fragile space separating you. And then, just as the candle's light began to waver toward its final flicker, you sensed the faintest breath of sound, a soft, deliberate exhale carried on the shifting air. The silence thickened once again, poised on a sharp edge of expectation, waiting for the next fragile moment to unfold. The shadow's slow retreat folded it into the dense darkness beyond, leaving the chamber's stillness suspended, rich and heavy with the promise of what was yet to come. The lamp's amber light flickered once more, casting long fingers of warmth across the faded paper screens. You sat still, knees resting gently on the cool bamboo floor, feeling the trace of its steady chill seep through the layers of your kimono. The delicate threads tugged softly, a woven reminder of your place here, silent, vigilant, and bound beneath the weight of waiting. The faint scent of incense, nearly faded now, wrapped around the edges of the chamber like a lingering ghost. Outside, the village remained cloaked in mist, dull outlines of rooftops barely visible beyond the glow of the lantern. The cold had settled deeper, folding thickly into the space between breaths, as if the night itself pressed inward to hold each moment captive. Your fingers drifted over the low table's lacquered surface, revering the silence that held you. The untouched sheet before you seemed to exhale a quiet patience, waiting for the brush to break its stillness, but your hand lingered just above it. Outside the window, the wind sighed, a soft, weary sound that stirred the curtains in gentle patterns, weaving the faintest dance of shadow and light. A slow tightening curled low in your chest, a coil of apprehension wrapped in the softest thread of resolve. The stillness stretched again, pulling thin like tissue over fragile bones. Your ears, tuned to the subtle sounds stitched through the silence, the distant drip of melting frost, the gentle crackle of leaves settling under invisible footsteps, the measured breath of the house itself exhaling after countless years. Just then, a soft, deliberate shuffle pressed faintly against the quiet, so light it might have been the settling of the wood. But your senses steeled against the assumption. The sound curled like a whispered secret around the edges of the room. You felt your heart sink to a slower heartbeat, cautious and deliberate, matching pace with the hidden rhythm of the night. You moved carefully. Each step drew the scratch of kimono fabric over the tatami, a soft hymn wrapped in restraint. The rough texture beneath your palm guided you as you rose slowly, the floor's coolness grounding trembling limbs. Lingering outside the boundary of the lantern's glow, shadows clung tight, breathing with a subtle life of their own. Shadows that swayed gently as though reluctant to part from age-old walls. At the corridor's edge, the worn wooden frame held its cool weight in your palm, steady and unyielding. Your eyes adjusted to the dim breadth beyond, where the pale moonlight filtered delicately through the paper panes, casting silver webs on the tatami. The scent of cedar smoke blended with damp earth, threading through the chilly air in slow, graceful spirals. Your breath slowed in harmony, steadying against the rising tide of uncertainty. You stepped forward, slow and controlled, the soft rustle of fabric folding into the quiet. The world seemed to hold its breath as you moved. Your senses sharpened to each small detail, the faint creak of a floorboard welcoming your weight, the curious drift of colder air weaving beneath the sliding door's narrow gaps, the barely perceptible flutter of a paper screen swaying in rhythm with the restless wind. In this half-light, everything was softened, thinned as if drawn on delicate rice paper. The shadows pooled like ink stains and lingered like whispered memories, pressed beneath the breath of time. You leaned gently against the wall, your skin alert to the roughness beneath your fingertips. Each tiny splinter, a quiet echo of years long past. From the depths of the night came another subtle sound. A muted thump carried along the corridor, vibrating faintly against polished wood, distant but undeniable. You tensed, lungs tightening, heart catching on the fragile edge between watchfulness and cautious hope. The presence beyond the screen was palpable, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat, riding the pulse of the house. Your gaze flicked to the narrowing gap between paper panels, catching the faintest tremor as if someone's breath brushed softly against the fragile veil. The lantern, struggling to hold its flame, cast nervous shadows, pulsing against the silence with hesitant rhythm. You felt the weight of eyes, unseen but heavy, drawn like invisible threads from the darkness to you. A whisper of warmth lingered suddenly at your shoulder, as if the ghost of a breath had passed close by. A fleeting caress, counterpoint to the pervasive cold. Though the chill tightened around you, again, the breath brought a fragile comfort, the fleeting promise of life threaded thinly through the frozen night. You lowered yourself softly, bamboo cool against your skin. The low table before you, a steady presence in the dimness. The untouched paper waited silently, its promise suspended between possibility and restraint. Your fingers hovered in stillness, reluctant to break the spell woven by time and shadow. Outside, the bell tolled once more, long and melancholy, its sound a silver ribbon wrapped around your senses, swelling like a distant memory you could almost grasp, but never quite hold. The steady, slow rhythm of those chimes settled deep within, blending into your slow heartbeat. Your eyes rose to the paper screens again, where beyond the veil of fluttering shadows, the hint of movement stirred, a slow, deliberate shift that hung suspended, fragile and tentative. A lingering shadow stepped back, retreating into the shrouded darkness outside the lantern's reach. You waited, breath caught softly in your chest, senses straining toward the retreating figure. The silence folded around you once more, thick and pregnant with unspoken promise, as the night held its secret close. Then, just as the lantern flickered toward its final glow, you sensed it, an unseen hand reaching through the darkness, poised, waiting for the next motion in this timeless dance. The darkness beyond the lantern's glow pressed heavily, folding around your figure like a thick velvet curtain drawn tight against the world. Your breath stalled when the shadow shifted again, a subtle movement, deliberate, like a slow brushstroke on a canvas of silence. The cool bamboo beneath your knees grounded you, but it could not still the tremor threading faintly through your limbs, a quiet shiver that seeped from the nape of your neck down to your spine. Even the faintest flicker of lantern light seemed hesitant now, as if reluctant to disturb the fragile balance hanging between breath and shadow. Your fingers curled lightly around the lacquered edge of the low table, the smooth surface cool and steady, a small tether to reality amid the intangible pulse of the room. You felt the heavy weight of waiting settle deeper in your chest, slow and measured, like the last hesitant beats before a storm's quiet center breaks. Outside, the mist cloaked the village, still, swallowing the world beyond the fragile paper screens, its damp fingers curling delicately around every eave, every crevice. The scent of cedar smoke blended silently with the faint, lingering sweetness of incense, a muted tapestry woven into the cold air. You shifted your gaze toward the far edge of the chamber, beyond the folding screens. There, the shadow lingered, no longer just a flicker, but a slow, deliberate silhouette, stepping lightly through the muted gloom. It flowed like ink spilled on tissue, edges soft yet intent, dissolving slowly into the dimness, as if reluctant to reveal its full shape. The silent exchange carved a taut line through the quiet, as though the very fabric of the room stretched thin in response. Your pulse found its own rhythm, steady, deep, a careful cadence to match the drawn-out hush that settled like frost over your skin. The faintest breeze slipped in through the half-open window, teasing the edges of the paper screens with a whisper of motion that stirred shadows into a delicate dance. The ink-wet paper before you seemed to wait with quiet patience, untouched, its pristine surface a promise suspended in time. A delicate pause before the first brush touches down to break the stillness. Your breath drew longer, sliding softly between your lungs as you felt the tension coiling slowly inside. A quiet pulse thrumming beneath the cold fabric of your kimono. Outside, the distant toll of a bell softened the night's severity with a melancholy lullaby, folding gently through the village's sleeping heart. Each echo curled slowly into your veins, a fragile thread bridging the space between moments in the layered quiet. Your eyes caught the subtle play of light on the worn wood beams overhead, where shadows nestled like forgotten memories, deep and unfathomable. The room seemed to pulse softly with the breath of history, an ancient rhythm threading through the suspended present. A soft scrape brushed across the tatami, not loud but deliberate, the gentle sound of fabric against fibers, a quiet hymn marking your cautious advance. Your bare feet slid slightly over the textured weave, each movement measured and intentional, as if navigating between whispers of time woven into the floor itself. The cool grain pressed against your skin, steady and unchanged under the lingering weight of centuries. You rose slowly, the rough threads of your kimono pulling softly, a subtle reminder of solitude and restraint. You stepped forward, the delicate scrape of your sleeve tracing an almost inaudible path as fingers brushed gently along the sliding door's wooden frame. The paper slid with a quiet sigh, revealing a narrow corridor veiled in shadow. The faint glow of a distant lantern painting patches of muted gold onto the worn floorboards. A faint scent of damp earth rose to greet you, mingling softly with the smoky cedar and faint traces of past fires long since faded. Your senses sharpened, each minute detail stitching itself into the fabric of your awareness. The uneven texture beneath your palm, the whispered creak beneath your feet, the subtle shift of colder air threading through the narrow gap. The corridor stretched away, a slender path swallowed in darkness and light, folding and unfolding in layers of mist and shadow. Your kimono felt heavier now, the fabric's coarseness a constant presence against your skin, cinching your movements with quiet insistence as your breath slowed to a gentle, steady cadence. The pulse of the house thrummed alongside your own, soft creaks, distant drips, the low sigh of ancient wood settling deep into the night. You reached the threshold where the corridor veered out of sight, the lantern's flickering glow barely caressing the edges of the space beyond. Suspended between here and the unseen, your fingers brushed the cool paper screen, its fragile surface trembling faintly beneath your touch, like the wings of a moth, uncertain whether to flutter or still. The air carried a deeper resonance now, thick with unspoken expectation, and the weight of countless unvoiced moments held close beneath breath and shadow. For a long moment, the world held its silence. Then, from the depths beyond the screen, came a subtle shift, a slow, deliberate movement curling out of shadow like ink dissolving in slow water. The figure stepped forward, not hurriedly, but with the quiet insistence of a breath held and carefully released. The lantern's flame wavered, and you saw the faint outline of a hand, delicate and purposeful, reach out. An action so slight it might have been a trick of light or shadow. You held your breath. The space between you and the unknown was slender, taut, charged with the quiet power of unsaid words and hesitant steps. A breath slipped out, slow and low, mingling with the faint scent of wood smoke and cold stone. The shadow's shape lingered longer, balanced delicately on the verge of visibility, then receded, folding back into the dense curtain of darkness from which it had emerged. But in that fleeting moment, you felt it, an unmistakable presence, watching, waiting, poised at the edge of silence, like a whispered secret yet to be told. And as the lantern's light flickered its last uncertain dance, a slow, deep breath threaded softly through the stillness, an invitation, quiet and profound, to cross the threshold waiting just beyond the fold of shadows. The shadow had receded into the dark folds beyond the lantern's fragile glow, leaving behind a chamber thick with silence and a heavy press of unspoken waiting. You remained kneeling, the cool bamboo pressing against your skin through the coarse layers of your kimono, a steady weight anchoring you amidst the whispered stillness. The faintest hint of smoke curled lazily through the air, a reluctant thread linking the moment to distant hearths and long-vanished fires. Your breath fell slow and deep, each exhale melting quietly into the thick atmosphere. Your fingers traced the lacquered edge of the low table again, the smoothness a silent comfort beneath the rough fabric of your sleeves. The pristine paper before you lay untouched, its pale surface poised like a breath held in anticipation, waiting for the first delicate stroke of ink to break the fragile spell. Outside, the mist pressed closer, a cold veil seeping through every crack and crevice of the chamber, blurring the boundaries between shadow and world. The distant toll of a bell rolled through the night once more, faint yet insistent, threading its melancholy notes through the quiet village. The echo stretched and thinned into softness, unfolding like a pale ribbon of sound caught between your slow, steady heartbeats. Its presence spun a delicate thread of meaning through the air, carrying with it a subtle promise suspended in time, just beyond reach. Your hand lifted from the table's surface, hovering above the blank paper, feeling the stillness pulsing subtly beneath your fingertips. Every nerve sang in gentle tension, the weight of waiting cocooned tightly around your chest, a slow coil of restraint holding strong against the soft ache of uncertainty. The coarseness of your kimono's weave brushed like whispered warnings against your skin, a constant reminder of the fragility woven into this moment's breath. Beyond the folding screens, the corridor lay cloaked in deepening shadows, the lantern's flame flickering unevenly as if hesitant to hold its vigil. The faint rustle of fabric, soft, deliberate, disturbed the perfect stillness once again. You quieted the quickening rhythm of your breath, your gaze sharpening into the darkness, weaving through the slivers of light and shadow like a thread guided by necessity. Slow steps pressed softly against the tatami, each movement deliberate and measured, wrapped tightly in the cocoon of your own restraint. The scent of damp earth and smoldering cedar deepened, mingling with the fading trace of incense that clung to the corners like a forgotten memory. Your pulse synchronized with these small, subtle signals, the careful scrape of footsteps, the hesitant stirring of air, the muted sighs of a house breathing slowly beneath the weight of history. A single fold in the paper screen stirred gently under your fingers, trembling like the wings of a moth caught in a faint breeze. You leaned closer, sensing the intangible thread of presence brushing near, poised on the edge of revelation and retreat. The coolness of the wooden frame pressed into your palm, solid and enduring, a tether to the tangible amidst the swirling unknown. The shadow emerged again, shifting just beyond sight, slow, deliberate, dissolving softly into the muted hues of the chamber's gloom. Its shape was blurred, indistinct as ink bleeding through rice paper, yet unmistakably deliberate in its quiet approach. The air thickened, folding heavier between moments, laden with the unspoken language of waiting and wary watchfulness. Your heart tightened, a slow, steady thrum beneath the veneer of calm, as the figures hidden in the half-light pressed on the fragile thread between presence and absence. Breath slowed, deep and tortuous, threading through your senses like a fragile smoke, mingling with the lingering scents and the cool touch of the chamber's worn wood beneath your fingertips. The lantern's flame flickered more fiercely for a moment, casting trembling shadows that curled like silent fingers along the edges of the tatami. The warmth it lent felt brittle, fragile as a candle before the wind, and your muscles coiled tighter in response to the subtle change. The quiet murmur of the house settled around you, a faint chorus of settling timbers and falling frost, each sound a tether binding time and space in gentle harmony with your waiting. Slowly, your gaze drifted upward, tracing the curve of ceiling beams darkened by age, their grain carrying whispers of nights quiet and endless as this one. You felt the weight of those years pressing softly through the thick silence, a heavy, exquisite history threaded through the room's still breath. The dance of moth-like shadows on the walls seemed to pulse faintly, matching the slow cadence of your steady heart. With the gentlest movement, you rose, the soft scrape of your kimono against the tatami, marking fragile passage through the vast hush. The coolness of the floor pressed against your bare feet, grounding each deliberate step as you moved toward the corridor once more. The air was dense here, rich with the dampness of the night and the smoky tendrils of distant fires, weaving a fragile tapestry around your senses. The soft rustle grew closer, the deliberate whispers of fabric sliding over worn wood, and you held the silence between your breaths, poised on the cusp of the unseen moment. Each heartbeat stretched long and thin, a fragile wire pulled taut beneath the nervous weight of anticipation. Ahead, beyond the fading curve of shadow and light, the scent of wet earth deepened, threaded with a faint, metallic tang that pricked your awareness like the edge of a forgotten memory. In movement danced again, slower now, patient and precise, before falling into utter stillness. You stopped, the paper screens trembling lightly beneath your touch, their fragile veil a thin border between secrecy and disclosure. The lantern's amber glow waxed faint and trembling, casting long, fragile shadows that curled and swooned against the silent walls. Quiet settled heavy, an unyielding breath expanding and folding back upon itself, cradling the space between moments. And then, as if the night itself had chosen this instant to hold its deepest secret, a whisper breathed out, a soft, deliberate exhale threading through the silence, breaking the long hold of waiting with a gentle, electrifying tremor. You felt the weight of unseen eyes sharpen, threading thin lines of cold certainty across the fragile calm. The corridor held its breath alongside you, suspended in a taut silence that trembled and waited. The lantern's flame faltered one last time before settling into a steady, gentle glow. The shadow, now softened into a dim silhouette, withdrew farther into the dark recesses of the chamber. You remained still, the fragile silence folding around you like the worn threads of your kimono, steady, familiar, and quietly resolute. Your fingertips lingered over the smooth lacquer of the low table, tracing the delicate contours as if inviting the moment to unravel its final secret. Outside, the winter mist thickened, drawing the village deeper into its quiet embrace. The distant bell tolled softly again, a tender echo threading through the night's stillness, weaving a calm rhythm that matched your own slow breath. Slowly, you eased your hand down to the pristine sheet of paper, still untouched, awaiting the poet's brush. The pristine surface, once charged with unspoken tension, now held the quiet promise of closure. Your breath softened, releasing the weight of waiting as the tension that had coiled in your chest unwound like the ebb of a long-held tide. You lifted the brush, feeling its familiar weight nestle comfortably in your fingers. The coarse weave of your kimono brushed softly against your skin as you settled deeper into the quiet ritual, the dance of ink and paper, the slow unfolding of delicate characters tracing whispered stories. Each stroke unraveled a thread long pulled taut, a final word woven gently into the fabric of the fading night. Outside, the mist curled lazily, its ghostly fingers retreating, as the first pale blush of dawn stretched tentatively over the horizon. The faint scent of cedar smoke lingered, a steady comfort mingling with the sweetness of cooling embers. A soft breeze slipped through the half-open window, carrying the fresh, earthy scent of morning dew. It brushed against your skin with a quiet tenderness, a subtle stillness. The chamber seemed to exhale with you, its ancient walls bearing the tender weight of countless whispered words and silent watches. The faintest warmth blossomed within the lacquered surface, reflecting the steady flicker of awakening light. The old wood beams overhead, once so solemn and distant, now felt like guardian sentinels softened by the promise of a new day. As your brush moved, sure, deliberate, and calm, the delicate characters took form, each curve and line a whisper carried across time and shadow. The ink pooled briefly, then settled, a balance struck between stillness and expression. The fragile wings of words began to flutter lightly, no longer trapped in tension, but freed to drift softly on the morning air, reaching for the subtle spaces between breaths. In the quiet moments that followed, the distant village began to stir, tentative footsteps mingling with the gentle rustle of awaking leaves. The paper screens fluttered lightly, casting playful patterns on the tatami that shifted with the growing light. You pressed your palm to the warm wooden frame, feeling the steady pulse of life returning to the house. The threads of age and history weaving seamlessly together with the fresh fabric of now. Your eyes closed briefly, the tapestry of night's watch dissolving into the gentle hues of dawn. The air carried a renewed softness, as if the long-held silence had given way to a quiet harmony. The shadows receded, no longer sharp or daunting, but gentle murmurs folded into the waking world. When you opened your eyes again, the chamber was subtly transformed, still steeped in history, but now luminous with the quiet grace of resolution. The burdens of waiting, the veiled eyes, and the tense hush had softened into a steady calm. The cold that once pressed insistently against your kimono had relaxed into a comfortable coolness, like a familiar breath shared in the softness of early morning. You rose slowly, the smooth bamboo mat cool beneath your bare feet, grounding each measured step into the morning's gentle promise. The weight that pressed upon your spirit lessened, unfolding into a clear space where hope and quiet strength intertwined. Outside, a lone bird sang, a crisp, pure note breaking the hush with the subtle joy of awakening. You approach the folding screens, their worn fibers catching the daylight in soft, flecked patterns. The shadow that had unsettled the night's stillness was gone, replaced by the peaceful assurance of a room that held its stories without haste or fear. The silence remained, but it was no longer heavy or confining. It was a shared breath, the space left for what comes after waiting ends. With a gentle push, the screens slid open to reveal the village bathed in the soft glow of morning, mist lifting like a veil drawn aside. The rooftops glistened with frost's fading kiss, and the air hummed quietly with the rhythms of daily life returning. You let your gaze drift across the familiar landscape, each detail a thread in the tapestry of now, woven from shadows, light, and waiting. Kneeling once more, you breathed deeply the mingling sense of pine, earth, and warming wood smoke. The tension that had gripped you loosened fully, replaced by the calm satisfaction of completion. The ink on the page, now dry, held the final imprint of a story, written not just in words, but in silence, breath, and the spaces between. As the dawn brightened, your thoughts dissolved into the gentle cadence of a new day beginning, a quiet symphony of endings and beginnings intertwined. The chamber, the village, your heart, all seemed to exhale together, settling into the peaceful rhythm of what is, what was, and what remains. Your fingers rested softly on the table, the brush laid down with a quiet reverence. The final word traced, the last secret shared, the ancient dance at its close. The night's watch had ended, and in its place was the soft, enduring light of dawn's embrace. You leaned back gently, knees on cool bamboo, allowing your breath to slow fully. Each exhale a gentle wave settling upon a calm shore. The silence, now a tender companion rather than a weight, wrapped around you like a familiar quilt. Outside, the soft stirrings of life unfolded steadily, carrying away the shadows and bringing with them the simple promise of rest. And so the quiet lingered, still, vast, and tender, inviting you to close your eyes and drift into the unfolding calm, where stories dissolve and dreams begin. The final chapter, softly written and softly ended.